All right. So bonjour kakanawiya, gigijabalwo minwa Sākihitowin Awāsis na dishnakas, wabjeshi na dodem, mitchifo pemzu nishnabe akwayendao, dashken zibi na dinda, gishagagijawang na donjiba. So my name's Awāsis. I carry 3 names, and I answer to all 3 of them and most variations of them. So you could call me Awāsis, you could call me Courtney is my English name. And I also have a name within the Thunderbird Sundance Lodge here, Gigijabalwo Wanakwe, which means morning mist woman. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here talking to your class today. I told you a few things in my introduction in my language, and that's important to me because that's one of our protocols. As a Nishnabek woman, Ojibwe Métis, we always want to know, where someone's from, who they are, and where they're going. So I told you my name, my clan. I'm the Pine Marten clan, and my nations, the Orpemzu and Nishnabek nations. And that's actually a confederacy. The Nishnabek Confederacy is comprised of 3 nations, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Nishnabek. So within these different layers of myself, I have different responsibilities. So in our society, the Pine Marten clan, my clan family, are the warriors, and that doesn't mean that we're out there to cause ruckus and trouble. It actually means we have a responsibility to uphold the peace for our people. We're the strategists. Do people know what pine martens are? No, they're more prevalent up north, but I guess they're kind of like weasels, but they're like feisty little animals. They're cute, but they can take out a porcupine, okay? But yeah, so that's what I'm saying in the language is actually that's who my family is, the Pine Martens. So I'm a spoken word artist. I'm a cultural geographer. I'm studying in the master's program here. And I'm also a land defender. So that's related to my research. I'm looking at pipeline resistance locally. And yeah, I mentioned a spoken word artist, a sun dancer. I consider myself a water carrier and a water warrior, and I'm involved in those movements. And I'm also a two-spirited woman. And so I'll get into what that means a bit more, but I wanted this to be a discussion. I just don't want to talk at you for the next hour. So feel free to, if you have a question, just say it out or raise your hand if you want to get my attention. And I'm going to be asking you questions, so feel free to participate. So my first question is, whose land are we on? What Indigenous Territory are we on? Does anyone know? Yeah? Is it Anishinaabe? Nishnabek, yeah, is one. For sure. So Deshkan Zibi is our traditional name of the Antler River or the Thames River. And that name not only denotes the forks, right, like an antler, but also our stories about a horned serpent that lives in the river system. So yeah, Nishnabek. Anybody else? No problem. We're talking about whose Indigenous territory we're on. So we had Nishnabek. So the English name for the Nishnabek is the Ojibwe, right? They're one and the same. Any other ideas? There's a confederacy of 6 nations. That's pretty close. The Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois, as the French called them, right? So we have the Nishnabek Confederacy and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy have a treaty, an international agreement to share the Great Lakes region. It's called the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. And the idea is that the land is one dish, and we're both eating from the same dish, both our nations. So we have a mutual responsibility to protect the land for one another, to take not more than we need so that the other people can also flourish, can also support themselves on this territory. Yeah, and there's one more nation. No ideas? You're like, maybe? No? The Lenape people. So these 3 nations, the reservations are within 20-30 minutes of London. So we're actually in what we call a tri-res area. Yeah, but colonialism had a impact on where our territories currently are. So prior to contact, there was actually the Ottawandaron people here, which were considered a neutral Iroquoian language speaking people. And so a lot of the road names around the Museum of Archaeology are like Ottawandaron Road, right? So that's because that is where their village was. And those people were completely wiped out. There is no longer Ottawandaron people. There's also the Wendat Huron people, and they were violently displaced upon colonialism and forced more north. So they still have bands active today, but they're not in their traditional territories. So any questions about that? That's my land acknowledgement, I guess. We're on Dish with One Spoon territory. Welcome. Yeah. So anytime, feel free to ask questions. So did people read the 2 articles? I'm not going to be horribly offended if you say no. Yeah? What do you think? I just want some general feelings. Anything that was like surprising, or maybe you're like, I don't know if that's actually the case. Yeah.
Well, I found it interesting how they have like their own particular like place in their community, like they do things like to help their community, so they actually have like a position as a Two-Spirit person. Yeah,
so that there's distinct Two-Spirit roles and that they're culturally relevant and distinct. Good. Anything else? Nothing too surprising? Yeah.
I found it like really amazing that someone that is Two-Spirit is kind of like not, I wouldn't say elevated in the community, but is seen as like she said, had like a really specific role, like as healers or as like spiriters, which isn't the case in like similar.
Yeah, or even contemporary times, right? Yeah, good. Yeah, it was actually Two-Spirit people having a large Two-Spirit population in your community was kind of seen as like a prestigious thing, because to stay in your community, you were taking good care of them. So it was a sign of like a prosperous community in Anishinaabe society if you had a good deal of Two-Spirit people living with you. So it was a position of status, if you will. Good. All right, so before I kind of delve into it, unless anyone has any burning comments, I'm just going to play a short video that's part of a local project called A Queer Story. There's a bunch of these short videos online if you wanted to check them out, but Nicole Cohen, the filmmaker, sat down with me, so this is my living room and my dog, and yeah, I thought it'd be a good introduction.
If you could introduce yourself and maybe what you identify as.
Bonjour, אני Sākihitowin Awāsis medishnikas, wabjeshi nilodem, mitchifol pemsi nishnabe kwendao, or gitchida kwendao, Niizh Manidoowag, gitchaka gitchwa medonjiba, deshkinzibi medinda. So my name is Awāsis. I'm of the Pine clan from the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe nations. Grew up in Niagara Falls, and I live along the Anton River, and I'm a Two-Spirit warrior. So Two-Spirit is a umbrella term for a movement that is meant to unify LGBT Indigenous peoples. There's 6+ ways of describing genders and creed. So it's a movement of gender-varying Indigenous people that want to reclaim the meaningful roles we have. Two-Spirit people were healers, they were mediators, visionaries, teachers. We've always organized our communities around the women, around the Two-Spirit individuals. And because of those norms that were imposed on us, a lot of people lost a sense of identity, a sense of self and meaning and purpose in their communities. So that's what the Two-Spirit movement is looking to reclaim.
Great. All right. So that's what we're going to be chatting about. So this was the side I was supposed to draw on, right?
Yes.
All right. So is anyone familiar with this symbol? Usually it has the colors yellow, red, white, and black in each quadrant.
I'm familiar with it. I don't exactly remember what it means, but
do you remember what it's called?
No. Does it have something to do with like beads or anything like that?
No. Maybe. People could bead it. It's a pretty common design. Sometimes you see like blue, green, yellow, white instead of red and black.
Aren't there like certain animals in each quadrant?
Yeah, the quadrants mean different things. So this is it's a type of wheel. No, medicine wheel. It's a medicine wheel. And you're absolutely right. Each quadrant means a different thing, and various things. So you're saying different animals, right? The 4 directions, the 4 seasons, life stages, right? Infant, youth, adult, elder. Our 4 sacred medicines: tobacco, cedar, sage, and sweetgrass. Yeah, a variety of things. But today how I want to use it is the passing of time. So we're going to look at the process of colonization from a Two-Spirit perspective to really understand how that impacted Two-Spirit roles, responsibilities, how the word, term, Two-Spirit actually came about, and what that means in our community's resurgence today. So we always begin in the East. So we're going to look, first one's going to be pre-contact, contact, post-contact, the impacts of colonization, and then future, or what we're doing in our communities now. So I could just talk at you, but I'd really love to hear what you have to say. So when I say, based on the videos, the little conversation we've had already, what do you think was kind of underlying Two-Spirit roles in our communities prior to contact? Could be based on the articles. Should I migrate? Any idea? Yeah.
What do you mean when you say underlying?
Well, principles, kind of the nature of the role, anything really.
Was it not seen that people who had 2 spirits, they were special? It was seen as something that was valued and special, giving them wisdom. So those people were looked up to in the community?
Yeah, so the ideas of respect. And really, like Anishinaabe philosophy, everyone has a gift to contribute to our communities. So it's just from that you reason, why would you want to exclude anybody? If everyone has something valuable to contribute to our communities, why wouldn't you want their participation? It's very counterintuitive to think about excluding people because they don't fit within binary gender systems. So you mentioned this idea of 2 spirits, and we didn't literally take it as people having 2 spirits. It's a way to acknowledge that the Two-Spirit individuals are distinct from both men and women, but they don't actually have 2 spirits within them. It's more about the fluidity of their responsibilities in the community. And sometimes, from traditional perspectives, this doesn't actually have anything to do with sexuality. It has everything to do with our responsibilities, our places in lodge. I'm just going to say one thing and then I'll come back to you. So in our Sundance Lodge, there's a men's side and a women's side. And our Wendigo Con, our backwards people, they can actually go on both sides depending on the work they need to do. So that's everything about, who we are, our sacred responsibilities, and nothing about, sexual identity or even gender identity necessarily. And so that's, traditionally it would have been very much the same way. Ogichidakwe are warrior women. They could take wives, they could take husbands, they could take more than one wife, they could take more than one husband. But it didn't have impact their role as a warrior woman. It was about what they do and how they contribute to the community. What were you going to say?
We're talking about pre-contact.
Yeah.
And so I think, the word fluidity is big because it mentioned in the article that they didn't use
I guess they didn't call people he or she, and there was no rule such as that. But then that also brings me to question what you just said about your meetings and how men sit on one side and women sit on the other side. Is that something that's always been that way, or has that been after contact that there has been some sort of separation if you don't put people into groups based on their gender?
Yeah, no, so I was using that to point out that there's people that move in between. And yeah, the way that our Sundance teachings have been passed down, they haven't been changed. It's always been that way, the way we do things in Lodge, when we use the language, how things are done, the protocols. But yeah, you were talking about the article about language. And yeah, when we're speaking Anishinaabe-Moan, we're never saying he or she. You never, verbs, nouns, they don't change dependent on gender. You would call someone your child, you would call someone your grandparent, but you would never say he is or she is. And I feel like in a lot of ways English is catching up because our Indigenous languages and conceptualizations of gender have transcended the limits of language, the English language for a long time. Yeah. So does anyone else have any thoughts about that, or? No? Yeah, that was good. Yeah. So the thing I wanted to point out here is that roles were nation specific, they were cultural specific, they were community specific, but it didn't limit you. Our communities have a large amount of respect for autonomy and fluidity, like you said. So even in communities where there are binary genders only, men and women, traditionally they weren't rigid categories. People could move between them daily if they wanted to, and that wasn't seen as abnormal. So, in addition, people, Indigenous parents encourage their children to find their calling, to find who they truly are, and are supported through that journey. So, it's really two-spiritedness, Niizh Manidoowag, is part of a way of being. It's part of a way of living. Great. Anything to add to Precontact, do you think?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
I know that after contact, right, that there was the imposition that the male holds the power and the authority. Was there any of that pre-contact?
So our communities differ. Like even in this area, the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee are matrilineal. So, and I would even say they're matriarchal. So not only do they get their clans from their mother's side, but today in their longhouses, it's the clan mothers that have veto power. The men do kind of the proposal drafting, they pass it around the fire, the chiefs until they reach consensus, and then the men pass it to the women. All the clan mothers sit together, and then they can just veto it back to the drawing boards or pass it. Whereas in our community, Anishinaabeg, we're patrilineal, so we get our clans from our fathers, but our women are still integral to our decision-making process. So it's culturally specific, but I'll get a bit more into the imposition of band councils and kind of how that changed our structure. It's a good point. So yeah, upon contact, you might or might not have noticed I wrote the article in Briar Patch, so I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about that, but at the end we can kind of focus on the other one if people are interested. But yeah, so European colonization systematically alienated not only two-spirited people from their identity, but everyone in our communities as a whole. In particular though, two-spirit practices roles, traditions were driven underground, and in some communities completely eliminated. It's the first time I met a Two-Spirit elder wasn't until I was about 23, and I wasn't sure if I was going to ever have the honor of learning from one. So in some cases, Two-Spirit traditions have been completely eliminated or severely disrupted. But so early missionaries' reports, we're talking like before 1850, like the early 1800s. Two-Spirit individuals and traditions, specifically who the colonizers referred to as male Two-Spirits, they were prevalent in the records. But by the mid-1800s, 1850s, they had completely disappeared from missionaries' records. So this means that prior to policies that banned all Aboriginal ceremonies in the 1920s, we weren't allowed to gather in groups larger than 3 because that was seen as a ceremony. And before the extremely racist and sexist Indian Act, which is still part of Canadian legislature today, before that was passed in 1876, Two-Spirit ceremonies and identities were already nearly exterminated. So this means that although legislation was used as a tool to further alienate Indigenous peoples from their identities, from our traditional ways of being, traditional ways of healing, our relationship to spirituality, it was actually preceded by conversion and forced assimilation to colonial gender norms. So this, in my opinion, is one of the main tools of colonization, was the imposition of a rigid gender binary. So what I mean by rigid is that, you know, variation from and transcendence between categories was frowned upon and actually violently suppressed. Yeah, so moving to, any questions there? Yeah, feel free to just like jump in at any time. All right. So the impact of that, the imposition of the Indian Act. Are people familiar with the Indian Act when I say that? Kind of, a little, not sure. Okay. So the Indian Act facilitated the residential school system. It facilitated land theft and resulting from the intergenerational impacts of the residential school system. It also facilitated the 60s scoop and what we have coined the Millennium Scoop. So I'm just going to break down some of those. I just like dumped a lot on you, right? So the residential school system, are people familiar with that? Yeah, so what's that about? Yeah.
So the residential school was actually made by the government, and it's basically where they took Native people off the reserves and they forced them into boarding schools that, you know, really enforced Western values and religions and stuff like that, and basically stripped them of their culture and took them away from their homes, and it's had some pretty negative impacts afterwards.
Yeah. Extremely violent system. The famous quote is, right, the schools were designed to kill the Indian and the child, and in some cases they killed the child as well. There are mass graves behind schools not so far from here, and the way I've heard this described in our communities is a defeathering. So an eagle feather is a very sacred object to us. It's a connection to Creator. It's and so this idea of defeathering, like you actually get this visualization of like your spirituality being plucked from you, right? So that's very much what was happening in these schools. Like you're saying, children were disconnected from their families. They were literally stolen off their lawn. Parents were arrested for not bringing their children to the school, and you know, some of my elders today, my Sundance chief in particular, his parents saw the impact that the schools had on his older siblings. Him being the youngest, they took him out far into the bush to live, didn't ever report having a child so that he could avoid attending these schools. And for that reason, you know, he carries the teachings and the knowledge that he does. So large-scale cultural and family disruption was a result of this system. And, you know, kids were punished for speaking their languages, for hugging their siblings in the same school. If they were allowed to go home and see their family, like during Christmas break, the family risked imprisonment if they didn't bring the children back. If the kids came back and they were speaking their language again, there's stories about needles being put through their tongues, them, like, horrific accounts of physical abuse and sexual abuse were rampant in these schools. And essentially they're indentured work camps. They weren't actually intending to educate these children. The female children were responsible for, you know, making the clothes, preparing the mush. That's what they called it. The school outside Brantford, the Mohawk Institute, they actually call it the mush hole. Survivors call it the mush hole because they ate mush, porridge, 3 times a day. So the children would be not only malnourished, but forced to actually, you know, responsible for the everyday operations happening in the schools. The boys have stories about, you know, working on the orchards and the farms surrounding the school, and then being punished for stealing an apple, trying to feed their cousin or something like that. But these schools also facilitated the imposition of that colonial gender system, right? So there were children whose two-spirit identities prior to attending residential school were being supported in their communities, but upon attending the school, you know, were forced into either the women's side or the men's side, and disconnected from, you know, a land-based identity that supports gender fluidity. So not only that, but the Indian Act also facilitated the 60s scoop. So the intergenerational trauma resulting from these schools, and then legislatures such as the Indian Act deemed, just by virtue of being Native, of being an Indigenous woman, your house was untidy, was unkept. Yep?
Sorry, what was that called?
The 60s scoop. Yeah, because it happened through the 60s, well into the 80s, and it was another assimilation tactic where Indigenous children were taken from Indigenous families and forced into white homes, again, in order to disconnect them from their land base and also their spirituality. Anything else about the 60s scoop? So this is really disturbing. 1960s, yeah. The last residential school didn't close until 1992. So this isn't some far off historical thing. The impacts are very much alive in our communities. Yeah, and ads were placed in the paper, right, for these children. There was I believe it was called AIM, Adopting Indian and Métis, right? So these were large-scale programs, and tens of thousands of kids were relocated and disconnected from their ancestral ties and their immediate families. And a lot of those records are destroyed. There's currently a class action suit going on, and a lot of the documents that would enable now adults to reconnect to their families have been destroyed, right? And so now, coming out of that, there's also people using the term millennium scoop. To this day, one Native newborn is taken from a family every day in Manitoba. Every day. So there are more Indigenous children in institutionalized care now, today, than there was at the height of the residential school system. So in my opinion, this system hasn't disappeared. It's really just, it changed forms. Because, you know, it needs to in order for people to support it, right? For it to have the biopower to actually be facilitated. Yeah. And I mean, I can't go into all the differences. The Child and Family Services differ by province, right? They're governed provincially. But the numbers are particularly disproportionate in Manitoba because in order to even access child and family services, any support, maybe I need help with diapers, right? The form that you're signing upon intake actually legally justifies the apprehension of your children. So even to access any services, you're giving up your right to parent your child, right? Not necessarily, but when you're also experience racialized stigma, the Millennium Scoop is a result. Any questions about that? Yeah?
Is that only for Indigenous women who have to sign over their rights, or is it for anyone?
It's for anyone, but the way that it's applied is disproportionate, yeah. All right. So the forced imposition of the colonial structure, right? What does that mean? So when Indigenous people, when we organize ourselves, at least in my teachings, it's usually in a circle, right? Everyone, no one is in front of anyone else, no one's any better, you can see everyone, all voices are equally heard. So the structure that was imposed on us was a hierarchy, a pyramid, if you will. So at the top, we can guess, right, was white men, and then white women, men, Native women, Two-Spirit people, and then the earth, even. So you know, and not only were non-binary or two-spirit individuals put at the bottom there, but they were actually completely invisibilized. Two-spirit chiefs, in addition, women chiefs, weren't recognized at all by colonizers, who only actually saw legitimate authority through a patriarchal lens, so that only men could be chiefs from their understanding, and this excluded women and two-spirit individuals from decision-making systems, but also, the ability to have property, the ability to participate in the wage labor force. All of these things were gendered and imposed upon us. Yeah. So access to political power is gendered. Yeah, and again, access to Indigenous citizenship was mediated through marriage to a biological male. So if you were a Native man and you married a non-Native woman, she would become Native. And but if you were a Native woman and you married a non-Native man, you became white. You actually got a document from the government saying that you were now considered European. You can't vote, but yeah. Any questions about that? Yeah.
What was this hierarchy like? When was this, or what was it called?
So it's I don't know if it has a name, right? Like it's a way of racially categorizing people. And it's a colonial hierarchy, but I think that the way that it operates is very implicit, right? Like it doesn't necessarily need to be like in a policy or legislature, because it was the foundation of how people organized society. Yeah.
I have a question. I just have a thought.
Yeah.
You mentioned that when you had meetings or anything of the sort, that everybody would sit in a circle, and that way everybody was held equal, and everybody had equal say, and you could talk and hear everybody equally. And I think that just goes to show where our society places their values, because there is such a hierarchy of, who gets to say what and who has no say at all. And I just thought that was very interesting, because I'd never thought about it before. That when you had meetings, it was always in a circle, but I'd never thought about why. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, like there's a lot of assumptions that go into like how we relate to other people, right? That we don't necessarily think about. Like, yeah.
Do you think, this is just a random thought that I had, do you think that the fact that, your culture is so concerned with hearing all voices that it almost like it allowed its voice to get drowned out? Because I know it was beaten out of you guys and essentially taken away from you. But do you think that because the white man is essentially so kind of forceful with the way that we go about things in this whole hierarchical structure that it was a losing battle from the start, essentially, just because of the way that you have you guys have your society structured? It's so inclusive.
Yeah, I don't know. We could maybe talk about this later, but we have prophecies. We have 7 prophecies, and I'm a living part of it right now. But one of the earlier ones, before Contact, was actually about foreigners that would come. And part of the prophecy is we didn't know whether they would come wearing like a face of a friend or a face of an enemy. And our ancestors have told us, we need to be careful, because even if they're wearing one face at first, they could actually change. And we assumed the best in people, and we can debate now whether that was the right approach. But I think that I would look at it alternatively. I'd say that we're winning from the start. That I feel like I'm proud of who I am, and part of that is being strongly rooted in Nishnabek ways of living and Nishnabek ways of knowing. So yeah, I would just kind of turn that on its head, that I feel like that's a strength of our community as opposed to like a necessary like risk factor. My indigeneity isn't what makes me vulnerable. Being Two-Spirit isn't what makes me vulnerable. It's the social structures in place that create these risks and these vulnerabilities. No problem. That was a good question.
Very eloquent.
Thank you. All right, so we're still talking about the medicine wheel. That's what we're doing. So post impacts. I'm sure people are familiar with the fact that my community has higher suicide rates, rates of violence, domestic violence in particular, abuse, addictions, right? All these social ills. And those are a result of intergenerational violence and disconnection from the land, and a lack of sense of community belonging because of these things like the residential school system, like the 60s scoop, millennium scoop. So future, where we're going. I like to think of this as like what we're doing right now, what's happening every day. And we understand that we're not going to get back to living in wigwams, right, and only speaking Anishinaabe-Mowin. Like, it's a privilege to speak English, to participate in these structures that are really foreign to us, right? Like, I've learned the most about who I am not within 4 walls, but within lodges. But where we are trying to go does, it's about respect for our Two-Spirit people. It's about respect for our women, honoring the gifts that everyone has to contribute to our community, a vision of healthy, strong families that have a spiritual foundation to who they are. So this type of going full circle is decolonization. That's what this movement, this ideas are referred to as. But to me, it's really bizarre to talk about decolonization in English. It's just like doesn't work. So I like to think about Biskabyong. This is Ojibwe. And this is probably the closest concept we have to decolonization or cultural resurgence that we're living right now. It's a really exciting time to be Indigenous. A lot of my ancestors are, okay, when I have kids, they will be the first generation that was born at a time in my family that there aren't any residential schools. Okay, that is really exciting. The elders I'm learning from, this is the first time that they've been able to conduct ceremony in public, right? They learned underground in basements where their elders very intentionally were transmitting that knowledge in front of children, right? So this is a very exciting time. But Biskabi refers to like roundabout, right? Like coming full circle. So returning to the land, right? Environmental repossession is a huge part of decolonization, but also returning to ourselves. Because who we are is a land-based identity, but it's also about our connection to place. Yeah, so Biskavyong is the best way that I like to think about this coming full circle, because my ancestors knew, they knew that, you know, I would be wearing weird clothes, right? That like they knew that I would speak Ojibwe kind of funny, that we'd have like weird slang that's like half English, half Ojibwe. You know, they maybe couldn't predict that we'd be like flying around in cars and stuff, right? But they knew that we would look new, that we would look different, almost unrecognizable. And to me, that's really empowering, because you know, I don't speak my native language. Wait, I speak my native language with an accent. You know, that's really bizarre. But any questions about Biskavyong? Just kind of looking at the time. Okay, we're doing good. So, two-spiritedness. This word, two-spirit, where did it come from? Did people pick that up in the article? So, it's not a, yeah?
Just identifying the fluidity of not identifying, I guess, with being male or female, but being able to both.
Yeah, that's what two-spiritedness is. And it didn't actually, so it didn't exist in our languages prior to 1986, 87? Something like that. So it was actually decided upon as an English umbrella term at a gay and lesbian Native American gathering in Winnipeg. So it fits nicely into Ojibwe because it was created in Ojibwe, because we're an awesome nation. Niizh Manidoowag. I can say that in the language and people know I'm talking about two spirits. It's literally Niizh, two, Manidoowag, spirits. If I do that in Lakota, people, if I say two spirits literally in their language, people have the connotation of being kind of like in purgatory, like between living and dead. So a lot of Lakota people that might or might not participate in the two-spirit movement, they're like, whoa, I don't actually, you know, that doesn't speak to my experience as an Indigenous person. Yeah, but there are concepts in Lakota as well as in Ojibwe that describe particular roles. So in Ojibwe, I already talked about Sākihitowin, our warrior women. They were essentially a society of women who whose role in the community paralleled men's roles. And Agokwa, which I can't speak to as much because I'm not a two-spirit man, but that was the equivalent role of the biological men would take up women's roles. They'd weave baskets, they would, you know, take care of the water, these kinds of things. But yeah, two-spiritedness isn't meant to be, you know, imposed on every community. What's important there is the diversity of two-spirit roles, not the definition. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any questions about that? Yeah, so in some communities, you know, it's a third, fourth, fifth, sixth gender, but it's part of a worldview that has these multiple gender systems, but also appreciates variance, appreciates transformation, change, ambiguity in individuals as well as the world at large. So your two-spiritedness can change over time. Sometimes over a lifetime, sometimes over a day, and that's okay. That's actually supported and encouraged. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about there's 8 ways of understanding genders in Cree, but I'm not going to actually go into all of them because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Does that sound good, or are people really curious about them?
I know some people have to go to the next tutorial in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
We can go to the questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. I just didn't want to stare at you all if you don't have questions, but yeah, let's do that. Any questions? Yeah.
This is kind of related to what you were talking about. Native women, when they marry white men, they become...
yeah, so, sorry, that, just to say one thing, that's been phased out of the Indian Act with Bill, I can't think of the number, C, do you know? No? But, yeah, so they've actually began a process where women who lost status because of that, like maybe it wasn't them marrying a European man, but it was like their grandmother, they could like reclaim their status within a certain amount of generations. So this didn't like alleviate all the sexism in the Indian Act, but yeah, they have tried to address it in a few ways.
Was that recently, or was that?
It was within my lifetime, so I believe like the fight's been going on for a while, and it still is. There's still people that are pushing for further changes in the Indian Act, but within the 90s for sure. Yeah.
I'm just curious whether you think that if all over the world communities would be as supportive of non-binary identities as your community, do you think that all over the world you would have so many more gender identities, or do you think it's something really rooted in a place that we call Canada, Turtle Island?
Yeah, so I don't want to romanticize Two-Spirit experience. Like part of those impacts post-contact, people internalized those gender norms. So especially in remote and northern communities that are very isolated, you know, there is homophobic violence. People aren't held in the esteem that they were traditionally. But we are seeing, you know, a resurgence of Two-Spirit roles. And I think that there are Two-Spirit practices, even though they might not use that language, everywhere in the world. And you know, I've had interesting conversations with people about how colonialism has impacted their Two-Spirit identity in parts of Africa, in East Asia. So I think, you know, not everyone would agree with me. They would think that, you know, Two-Spirit is specific to Turtle Island. But I think that, you know, everyone's Indigenous from somewhere, and if you have an ancestral connection to traditions of non-binary gender, I think that is Two-Spiritedness. But, you know, I'm just one voice of many. Yeah.
I guess I have more of like a comment rather than a question, but
yeah.
I think it's the fact that, you know, this concept of gender fluidity that was happening in a time that was so long ago, like you said, like the 1800s and stuff like that, and previous to that, I mean, it really speaks to the fact that, you know, people nowadays in present time will say that gender fluidity is something that's not natural and things like that. Well, if it's not natural, how could it have been happening well before you ever even have thought of, or even your civilization was evolving?
Yeah, binary gender is not natural. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wanted to touch on one thing from the article about Indigenous languages. The first paragraph says that our Indigenous responsibilities were charted out for us, like women are water carriers, men are fire keepers, but you know, if we wouldn't wait for a woman if we were thirsty, or a man to throw wood on the fire if we were cold. And I wanted to talk about one of the elders, Cayuga elder, so a Haudenosaunee woman, who facilitates our moon ceremonies here locally. So I said in Haudenosaunee culture, you know, there isn't memory of more than 2 genders, but she'll sing a men's song because she's the only one there that knows how to sing the men's song, right? She's not going to just like, you know, not do that work because she's a woman. And I think that speaks to the non-rigidity of our gender roles, right? To this day, you know, if something needs to be done, we just do it. And yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing.
I have a question to the students actually. I'm just curious, Because listening to all this, what like would you like to see the whole world be? Like what you just said, right? If the work needs to be done, you just do it, and it's not so binary, and you wouldn't be in these fixed roles. Is there anyone who says, no, I want to be a man and nothing else, and this is how I want to see it? Or do you feel like, yeah, that fluidity is actually pretty cool, and we should all have that, not in a culturally appropriated way, but as in a philosophy? You can tell.
Oh, I was just going to say, indigenous masculinities, like all over the world, are different from how we conceptualize it in the Western world, right? In my culture, like even men that are men, they wear floral, they have long hair, they get their ears pierced, right? So, you know, the way that we understand masculinity is very power-laden and social context specific, right?
I think we are moving towards that in like our kind of modern day civilization, like the whole thing about gender roles for children and like, you know, stopping with the whole princess theme for girls and the, you know, monster truck theme for boys and having it be a, you know, a cohesive kind of playground for all to participate in. But I think it's going to take a long time for us to be able to get to the advanced place that your culture was at thousands of years ago. Do you know what I mean?
We're working on it.
Something to model, if anything, also to model our kind of progress on.
Yeah. Yeah, like one last thing I wanted to say is because, you know, people are always saying like, oh, we have to come out of the closet. Like something you hear in the Two-Spirit movement is like, there are no closets in a wigwam, or there's no closets in a teepee. And that's like, imagine a world where people didn't have to come out, right? Like where it was just accepted that who they are is who they are, and that, you know, our family structures support them on that journey no matter where they're going. I think that's a really powerful thing. So thank you so much. Yeah. Shimi Wetch. No, that's okay.
Like within your community, do people come out as transgender? Like where's their place? Or is like, I know Two-Spirit's different from being transgender, obviously, but like...
Well, it can and it can't. So there are trans people who consider themselves two-spirited, and yeah, like, and then there's like trans or gay or lesbian or genderqueer native people that don't identify as two-spirited because they don't see themselves as part of that tradition, right? So yeah, there's a lot of diversity even within how we understand two-spirit identity, because there's contemporary notions, there's traditional notions, and then there's people that exist kind of at the between both, right? So yeah, thank you, miigwech. My email is cdakin2, cdakin2 at UWO. If you have any questions or want to chat more, feel free to send me an email.
All right. Please give her another round of applause.
Thank you.